I think it's safe to say we all struggle with motivation from time to time. And that's exactly what we're diving into today, what motivation really is, why it can feel so elusive, and most importantly, how we can actually cultivate it.
And we've got some fascinating source material to unpack all of that, talk all about procrastination, motivation, and sometimes surprisingly, the power of forming good habits.
It really is. We often think about motivation as this sort of unlimited resource, like we can just tap into it whenever we need it. But
right.
What if I told you it's actually more like your phone's battery? You start the day fully charged, but every decision, every task you tackle kind of drains a little bit of that energy.
That's a great analogy, and it makes you think about why so many of us struggle with things like procrastination. You set these huge, ambitious goals for yourself, like, I'm going to write a novel this month, or I'm going to run a marathon with zero training.
Yeah.
And then we wonder why we're overwhelmed and we give up.
Oh, totally. I'm definitely guilty of that.
Yeah.
I remember this one time I decided I was going to become a morning workout person. Set my alarm for 5 a.m., laid out my cutest workout clothes, the whole 9 yards. And I made it exactly 2 days before I was hitting snooze.
So common, though. We set these unrealistic expectations and then we're surprised when we fall short. But here's the thing. There's a way more effective way to approach this whole building motivation thing. Instead of trying to run a marathon right out of the gate, what if we focus on like a series of sprints? Smaller, more manageable goals so you can build momentum and confidence over time.
Okay, so starting small is key. But how does that translate to building lasting motivation? I mean, it can't just be about setting tiny goals, right?
No, absolutely no. This is where the concept of intrinsic motivation comes into play.
Okay.
And to really understand this, we have to talk about this groundbreaking research. MIT, Carnegie Mellon, and the University of Chicago did this study, and it really challenged conventional wisdom about what drives us.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about the study. What did they find?
Well, for a long time, people believed that the main driver of motivation was external rewards, right? Like money, prizes, even just the promise of praise.
Yeah.
But the study actually found that people perform their best when they're intrinsically motivated, meaning they actually genuinely find enjoyment in the process, not just the outcome. In fact, participants who were intrinsically motivated were 32% more likely to achieve their goals than those driven solely by rewards.
Wow, 32%. That's huge. So it's not just about the carrot at the end of the stick. It's about finding a way to actually enjoy the journey.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. You think about it, you're way more likely to procrastinate on tasks that you find tedious or boring, even if there's some kind of big reward waiting for you at the end.
Exactly. Because that external reward, it's not enough to keep you going when you're not actually engaged. So this is where that buy-in idea comes in. You have to find a way to get yourself emotionally invested in what you're doing.
Okay, but how do you actually do that? I mean, not every task can be inherently exciting, right? There are going to be things we have to do that we just, don't necessarily love.
True. But even with the less than thrilling tasks, there are ways to find that buy-in and tap into your intrinsic motivation. It's all about perspective, finding ways to make the process itself more enjoyable. So, for example, if you dread going to the gym, maybe you find a workout buddy or try a new class that sounds challenging.
Yeah. I love that. So instead of forcing yourself to run on the treadmill, which, let's be honest, can be a total chore, you find a way to make it more enjoyable. Like maybe go for a run outside, explore a new trail, or even just listen to your favorite podcast while you jog. Like it's finding those little things that can make a big difference in your overall motivation.
Exactly. And the key here is that motivation, it's not some magical thing that some people have and others don't. This study really showed that it's a skill that can be learned and developed.
That's so encouraging. So even if you don't feel naturally motivated all the time, you can still work towards it. But how? What's the secret?
Well, according to the study, one of the most effective things is simply finding ways to make those tasks less tedious and more enjoyable. It sounds so simple, but it can be really powerful.
Okay, so we need to inject some fun into the process. But how do we do that practically? Can you give me some more specific examples?
Sure. Let's say you have tons of paperwork. Instead of just slogging through it at your desk, maybe you take it to a coffee shop or something, put on some music, turn it into a little, work retreat.
Ooh, I like that.
Or if you're dreading studying for that big exam, maybe you form a study group, make it a little more, social and interactive.
Yeah, those are some great examples. I can definitely see how those little shifts could, totally change how you feel about it. It's almost like you're tricking your brain into thinking it's not so bad after all.
Exactly. And the more you do that, the better you'll get at figuring out how to spark your own motivation, you know? It's like anything, like building a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
This reminds me of this Carl Jung quote. He said, "He who looks outside dreams. He who looks inside awakes." And it really seems to connect with what we're talking about here.
Yeah, it totally does. When we shift our focus inward and start paying attention to what actually engages us, what like makes us feel, energized, alive, we tap into a much deeper well of motivation.
Yeah, it's like we unlock a whole new level of energy and enthusiasm when we're really into what we're doing. It's not a chore anymore. It's an opportunity for growth, or fulfillment.
And that change, that can be huge, Instead of seeing tasks as like obligations or burdens, you can approach them with, I don't know, maybe curiosity and excitement. Even the most, I guess you could say, mundane activities can be more enjoyable if we just find ways to like connect with them personally.
And I think that's so important for our listeners to understand. We're not saying force yourself to be motivated. It's about finding ways to tap into your intrinsic drive. We all have, passions and interests. And the key is finding ways to align what you're doing with those inner sparks.
For sure. It's about rediscovering that joy in the process, not just focusing on the end goal. And that, I think, is like the real key to motivation.
It's funny you should say journey because I think it's a good time to recap where we've been on this deep dive so far. So we started by talking about how motivation is a finite resource, not an endless welfare, right?
Oh.
And then we learned from that research by MIT, Carnegie Mellon, and the University of Chicago that intrinsic motivation, that feeling of being totally engaged, is way more powerful than just chasing external rewards.
Right. And we've been talking about ways to actually cultivate that intrinsic motivation, starting small, making tasks more enjoyable, and, most importantly, connecting with what you're really interested in, your passions.
This has been so insightful. But I want to leave our listeners with something to take away from this. What's one small change someone could make today to, find more enjoyment in a task that they've been dreading?
Well, it could be as simple as changing your environment like we talked about. Maybe it's finding someone to help you stay on track. Or maybe it's taking a few minutes and just reframing how you think about it. The possibilities are, there are so many.
I love that. It doesn't have to be this big, huge change. Just a little tweak can really make a difference.
Yeah, and remember, motivation is a skill that can be developed. So don't be afraid to experiment, find what works best for you.
You might be surprised by how much you can actually achieve when you tap into that inner drive, like unlocking this superpower you never knew you had.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's remember, even small steps, they can lead to, significant changes over time. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
So true. It
Yeah.
really is all about taking that first step and then another and another. And, before you know it, you've made some real progress.
Yeah, you said it. It's those small, consistent steps that lead to big transformations.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into motivation. We've covered a lot of ground today. But I think the most important part is what you do with it. It's like having a toolbox full of all these powerful tools. Now you just got to go out and use them.
You got it. Take those small steps, experiment with what we've talked about today. And you might be surprised by what you discover about yourself.
And you don't have to do it alone either, right? Reach out to friends or family, maybe mentors, anyone who can support you along the way.
Oh, absolutely. Finding your people, building that support system, that can make all the difference.
Well, I hope this deep dive has left you feeling inspired and ready to take action. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those inner sparks burning bright.